إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So last week, I believe we covered the section regarding the fruits of Iman in the decree. And then we started looking at the section about the groups of deviation who became misguided on the topic of the decree. And we mentioned there are two main groups, the Qadariyah and the Jabariyah. The Qadariyah, there are two types. The old ones who rejected the fact that Allah's knowledge encompasses the affairs. متقدموهم وهم الغلاة الذين نفوا العلم والكتابة فضلا عن المشيئة والخلق. So those early Qadariyah, they rejected or they negated the knowledge of Allah. That Allah's knowledge encompasses everything and that Allah knows everything before it happens. And they negated the writing, that it is all written in the preserved tablet. And they negated the will and the creation. They negated a lot, and they are considered as the ghulat of that time. And هؤلاء الذين ظهروا في أواخر عهد الصحابة, those extreme ones who rejected the decree, they occurred or appeared at the end of the time of the companions. The second type, and the first type, like we said, they disappeared and finished. But the second type, وهم المنكرون كون أفعال العباد داخلة تحت مشيئة الله وخلقه. وهؤلاء هم المعتزلة والرافضة الاثني عشرية والزيدية وجميع من سار صيرهم. The second type are the ones who rejected the fact that the actions of the servants are under the will of Allah and the creation of Allah. They rejected that the af'alul ibad, our actions that we do, are under the will of Allah and the creation of Allah. And these are the Mu'tazilah and the 12ers from the Rafidah, the Zaydiyah, and others upon that way. وَهَؤُلَاءِ عِنْدَهُمْ غُلُو فِي جَانِبِ إِثْبَاتِ الْأَمْرِ وَالنَّهِي. And these groups, they have an extremism, excessiveness in terms of affirming the commandments and the prohibitions. والوعد والوعيد وقد ظنوا أن هذا لا يتم إلا بالتكذيب بالقدر وزعموا أن هذا مقتضى العدل والحق أن هذا العدل الذي زعموه غير صحيح إذ هو عدل يعطل كمال قدرة الرب ومشيئته. So they believed that the only way you can fully comprehend and implement the commandments and prohibitions and what is mentioned is by denying the decree, denying that their actions are within the will of Allah. وانحراف هؤلاء كثير في باب القدر ونقتصر الكلام في انحرافهم في هاتين النقطتين. Two important points we're going to mention. النقطة الأولى ينكر هؤلاء القدرية أن تكون أفعال العباد واقعة بمشيئة الله. They reject that the actions of the servants occur by the will of Allah. They reject that. They reject that the actions of the servants occur by the will of Allah. وينكرون أيضا أن تكون الهداية والإضلال بيده. And they also reject that guidance and misguidance is in the control of Allah. وسبب انحرافهم أنهم سووا بين المحبة والإرادة وأصلوا في ذلك تأصيلات وصلوا بها إلى معتقدهم الفاسد. And the issue that occurred with them is that they made equal between the love of Allah and the will of Allah. Between the love of Allah and the will of Allah. Because there are two types or two affairs. What Allah loves and what Allah wills. Al-irada al-kawniyya wal-irada al-shar'iyya. Sometimes Allah may will something to occur, but that doesn't mean that Allah loves it. People are kuffar. Does Allah love anybody who is a kafir? Of course not. People commit sins. Does Allah love that you commit sins? Of course not. But Allah wills and decrees them to occur as a test upon people, as a trial upon people. But this group of innovators and deviants, fail to understand that there is a difference between what Allah loves and what Allah may will to occur. So, because of that misunderstanding of theirs, they mentioned a few principles that were wrong. One of the wrong principles they mentioned was أن ما أراده الله فقد أحبه وما أحبه فقد أراده. They said incorrectly that whatever Allah wills, then He must love it. And whatever He loves, then He wills it. So they said everything Allah wills to occur, then He must love that. And we know that is not the case. Sins and kufr and these things, shirk, Allah does not love them, but Allah wills them as a test. But they made the mistake and said, if Allah wills something, that must mean that Allah loves it. Secondly, they said, أن السيئات لا يحبها الله ولا يرضى لعباده الكفر. They said, sins, Allah does not love them. Sins, Allah does not love them. التأصيل الثالث أن السيئات في بني آدم واقعة والسيئات لا يريدها الله لأنه لا يحبها فهي إذن واقعة بإرادة العباد. So their first principle was that everything Allah wills to occur, Allah must love that. But then their second principle was Allah doesn't love sins. But then how are you going to combine those two together then? Everything Allah wills, they said, Allah therefore loves. But they also said Allah doesn't love sins. But we know Allah wills sins to occur. So then what conclusion can we make now? They said everything Allah wills, Allah loves it. But then they also said Allah doesn't love sins. But Allah wills sins. So that's how they came to their third principle, which is that everything Allah wills, Allah loves. Allah doesn't love sins. That must mean that Allah did not will the sins. And therefore those are from our own independent actions outside of the will of Allah. That's the error. أن السيئات في بني آدم واقعة والسيئات لا يريدها الله. Allah doesn't love the sins and the evil deeds, and that must therefore mean that Allah isn't willing them, that it's us who will the evil deeds and the sins, and we do that ourselves independent of the will and decree of Allah. Because anything in the will and decree of Allah can only be the things that Allah loves. Anything in the will of Allah is only what Allah loves, they said. Everything Allah wills, Allah loves it. Sins, they said Allah doesn't love sins. It says in the Quran, وَلَا يَرْضَى لِعِبَادِهِ الْكُفْرِ. Allah is not pleased with kufr for His servants. So they said in that case, it has to be that kufr and sins and sayyi'at are not willed by Allah. They are our independent actions separate from the decree of Allah. And we know, of course, that is completely false. That is completely false, but this is how they ended up at their wrong conclusions. They make one principle that is wrong, then another principle that is wrong, and then they end up at another principle that is wrong. So they began saying everything Allah wills, Allah loves. Not necessarily. Then they said, but Allah doesn't love sins. That's correct. Allah doesn't love sins. But then they said, as a consequence, that must mean that Allah doesn't will sins. We are the ones doing that separately from the decree of Allah. وَفَرَّعُوا على هذا أن الأمر والإرادة متلازمان فما أمر به فهو يريده وما أراده فهو يأمر به. Branching off from that, they then also said that the command and the will are two things that are corresponding side by side. So that whatever Allah commands us to do, then that is what He wishes and wills for us to do. And whatever He wishes and wills, then that is what He commands us to do. والحاصل أنهم قصروا معنى الإرادة على الإرادة الشرعية فقط ونفوا الإرادة الكونية فزعموا أن العبد مستقل بإرادة فعله. So their problem was that they failed to understand that there are two types of the will of Allah. One is al-irada al-kawniyah, the will of Allah in the creational sense. And the other is al-irada al-shar'iyyah, the will of Allah in the legislative Islamic sense. In the Islamic or legislative sense, whatever Allah wills, then obviously Allah loves. Islamically, whatever Allah commands us, etc., Allah loves all of that. But in the creational sense, things that are decreed to happen, that doesn't necessitate Allah loves them, kufr and shirk and sinning and all these evils that occur. But they fail to understand there are these two types of irada. And they considered everything to be just irada shar'iyyah. That whatever Allah wills, it's got to be that Allah loves it. Anything Allah wills, He's got to love it. Why would He will it otherwise? That's what they began to say from their misguidance. And that's why they ended up claiming that our sins and evils, those actions we do, they are not from the will of Allah. They are not from the decree of Allah. We do that separately, they said. وماذا عن نصوص المشيئة الصريحة في أن ما شاء الله كان وما لم يشأ لم يكن عندهم. So then you would say to them, what about all of the texts that highlight whatever Allah wills, then it will occur, and whatever Allah does not will, then it will not occur? لقد ذهبوا في نصوص المشيئة إلى تأويلها بمعنى الأمر والتكليف. Regarding those texts, those ayat, etc., where Allah tells us about the will, they made an interpretation that this is talking about the commandments. For example, يقول القاضي عبد الجبار أشهر القاضي عبد الجبار, he is one of the famous Mu'tazilis. He said عن قول الله تعالى وما تشاءون إلا أن يشاء الله. You do not will except that Allah wills. That you do not will an affair except that Allah wills it first. قال فبين أنه لا يشاء اتخاذ السبيل وسلوك طريق الحق إلا أن يشاء الله ذلك بالتكليف والأمر والنهي وإبلاغهم حد التكليف. He said فبين أنه لا يشاء اتخاذ السبيل وسلوك طريق الحق إلا أن يشاء الله ذلك بالتكليف والأمر والنهي. That a person does not will to tread upon the path of truth except by way of the responsibilities and the commandments and the prohibitions that Allah has given. وأما قوله تعالى ومن يشاء الله يضلله ومن يشاء يجعله على صراط مستقيم, that whomsoever Allah wishes He misguides him, and whomsoever Allah wishes He guides him to the straight path. أولوه بأنه يجعله كذلك في الآخرة. They said no, this is talking about the afterlife, because it says من يشاء الله يضلله, whomsoever Allah wishes He misguides. But according to them, misguidance is something we do. It's not in the will of Allah, but the ayah says Allah guides and misguides. They said no, that's talking about the afterlife, not in this world. That's in the afterlife it's talking about. أو أنها في الدنيا والمراد التشبيه بمن هو في الحقيقة كذلك. They said, or it could be talking about this world, but the point is just to give an example or a resemblance, not that Allah is the one actually decreeing that upon the person to be misguided. والخلاصة أن المعتزلة منعوا أن يهدي الله من يشاء ويضل من يشاء. So the Mu'tazila basically rejected that Allah guides whom He wills and misguides whom He wills. إذ الهداية عندهم مقصورة على هداية الدلالة والإرشاد دون هداية التوفيق. Because according to them, there is only one type of guidance, and guidance is two types as well. There is the guidance of ad-dalalah wal-irshad. When you show people the right path, you show them the sunnah from the bid'ah, the tawheed from the shirk. You clarify to the people that straight path. That is ad-dilalah wal-irshad. But then there is another type of guidance, hidayatul tawfiq. Hidayatul tawfiq. And that is the inner guidance. And that is only from Allah. You can give da'wah to a person as much as you want, they might still not accept from you. Maybe though, somebody else you give them da'wah and they do accept from you. What's the difference? You gave the same da'wah to all of them. The difference is the inner guidance. Maybe Allah decreed for some of them that inner guidance, and so they were guided. And others, they were not. Even though you did exactly the same with all of them, gave them the same da'wah to all of them. Because you can do that, but you cannot give the inner guidance to open up the heart of a person. So they made the mistake of saying that guidance is only the first type, ad-dilala wal-irshad. That you guide the people, you show them, you tell them, and there's nothing else about Allah guiding the hearts and the inner guidance. وبما أنهم قصروا الهداية على هداية الدلالة فإن الهداية عندهم عامة لجميع الخلق وليس هناك هداية خاصة للمؤمنين. So in that case, according to them, guidance is just an open affair to all of the people. It is not specific to the believers, that only the believers are upon that guidance. أما قوله تعالى يضل من يشاء, as for the statement of Allah that He misguides whom He wills, فمحمول عندهم على معنى العقوبة والأخروية. So when it mentions that Allah misguides whom He wills, according to them, that cannot be, because Allah only wills things that He loves. So then how do they explain the ayah? They say, well, maybe that could just mean punishes. Allah punishes whom He wills. يضل من يشاء, meaning يعاقب من يشاء. He punishes, يعذب من يشاء. So they misinterpreted it completely and gave a different interpretation to it so that it would fit in line with their beliefs. Or they said it just means that this will happen in the afterlife, not in this world. فهؤلاء القوم ليس لهم مسلك إلا مسلك التحريف ولا مركب إلا مركب التأويل. So these types of misguided individuals, all they can do is misinterpret. That is all they basically do, the groups of innovation. They misinterpret the texts. Here now it says يُضِلُّ مَنْ يَشَاء. They say no, that actually means يُعَذِّبُ يُعَاقِبُ. Change the word to something else. Allah didn't put those other words in the Quran. Allah put this word, يُضِلُّ مَنْ يَشَاء. This is what Allah said. But they misinterpret to different things, and that is the only way they can keep up their false aqeedah. وَلَوْ لَمْ يَكُنْ فِي قَوْلِهِمْ إِلَّا مُخَالَفَةٌ أو مخالفة المعلوم بالضرورة قطعا عند سائر المؤمنين لكفى، إذ كلهم مطبقون على أن ما شاء الله كان وما لم يشاء لم يكن، فكيف بمخالفة قولهم لعشرات النصوص المثبتة لمشيئة الله تعالى. So these individuals, they have opposed what is known by necessity amongst all of the other believers. They have opposed what is known by necessity to all of the other believers. And everyone is agreed upon the fact, whatever Allah wills, then it will occur, and whatever Allah does not will, it will not occur. Whatever Allah wills, from all of the affairs, including those sins and other things, al-irada al-kawniyah, the creational sense. قال العلامة ابن القيم رحمه الله وقد نظرت في أدلة إثبات القدر والرد على القدرية المجوسية فإذا هي تقارب 500 دليل. Ibn al-Qayyim said, I looked at the evidences affirming the decree and the refutation upon the Qadariyah, the refutation upon the Qadariyah, the Majusiyah, and I found that there are approximately 500 evidences regarding the decree and the refutation of their false aqeedah. 500 or so evidences upon that. ويكفينا في الرد عليهم دليل واحد. We'll mention one evidence sufficient. And that is the ayah ولكن الله حبب إليكم الإيمان وزينه في قلوبكم وكره إليكم الكفر والفسوق والعصيان أولئك هم الراشدون فضلا من الله ونعمة والله عليم حكيم. فهذه الآية صريحة الدلالة في أن الهداية محض منة من الله. Here it mentions, but it is Allah who made Iman beloved to you and beautified it in your hearts, and made kufr and disobedience and sinning disliked and hated to you, and those are the rightly guided ones. This ayah clearly highlights, therefore, it is Allah who gives that guidance to the people. Allah, the one who made Iman beautified and beloved to you in your hearts. ومع ذلك فقد زعموا أن الخطاب لسائر الناس. And despite that, they claimed that this address in the ayah is for all of the people. وَأَنَّ مَعَنَا, meaning everybody has Iman made beloved to them, even the disbelievers. وَأَنَّ مَعَنَا حَبَّبَ أي فعل ما عنده أحب المؤمن الإيمان من الأمر والوعيد والترغيب. So they said the meaning of حبب, it is that it was made beloved to the believers in terms of the command and the threats and the encouragement, meaning that they misinterpret it again. Every time the people of innovation, when it comes to the ayat that refute them, they simply make tahrif or some type of distortion or misinterpretation, some ta'wil, so that it will fit in with their ideas. فقولهم هذا باطل مخالف لشرع والعقل. So their evidence is incorrect and false. Even intellectually, even من العقل, it is false. فأما مخالفته للعقل فإنه إذا كانت إرادة الإنسان متساوية الاحتمالين فإما أن يختار الهداية وإما أن يختار الضلال، فما الذي سيرجح أحد الاحتمالين على الآخر؟ فإن قالوا محض الإرادة قلنا محض الإرادة متساوية الجانبين فيلزم الترجيح بلا مرجح، وهذا ممنوع ضرورة، فلا بد إذن من مرجح خارجي وهو إرادة الله. Intellectually, if they say it is us, it is not Allah who wills the evil and the sins, it is us who do that outside of the decree of Allah. So we've been given an irada, and we have two sides to that irada, to do good, to do bad, and there are two equally balanced sides. So then how do we end up making a choice, or how do we end up going to one side or the other? It requires something extra in there, and that is the inner guidance of the heart that comes from Allah. The righteous ones are given the inner guidance and they choose upon the right path, and the ones who are not given that inner guidance, they remain upon the misguided path, or go upon the misguided path. فالخلاصة أن المعتزلة أثبتوا الإرادة شرعية فقط. So the Mu'tazila, they only affirmed الإرادة الشرعية, that Allah loves what He wills, and that's it. And they only affirmed the general type of guidance, not the inner guidance of the heart. And they rejected the will of Allah, and they rejected the inner guidance. That's the first thing they rejected, that Allah wills the sins and the disobedience. These are not from Allah, they are outside the decree. We do that because Allah only wills the things He loves. That's their first mistake. The second mistake they made was النقطة الثانية ذهب المعتزلة إلى إنكار كون الله خالقا أفعال عباده خالقا أفعال عباده. That the Mu'tazila, they rejected the fact that Allah creates the actions of His servants. That Allah creates the actions of His servants. Abdul Jabbar, the misguided one from the Mu'tazila, he said, أتقولون في أفعال العباد إن الله عز وجل لم يخلقها؟ قيل له نعم بل هي من جهتهم واقعة حادثة. That do you say the actions of the servants are not created by Allah? Then we say yes. That's what he says. We say yes. The actions of the servants, they occur from them, and they are the ones who create them. Because remember, there were four parts to the decree: the knowledge of Allah that encompasses everything, the fact that all of it is written in the preserved tablet, the fact that Allah wills it all, and the fact that Allah creates it all. Allah wills all of the decree, and then Allah creates all of the decree. But this is what they rejected, that Allah creates the actions of the servants. Now, وقد استدلوا إلى شبه عقلية فيما ذهبوا إليه. And they have some intellectual doubts as to how they came to their misguided understanding. الشبهة الأولى: لو كانت أفعال العباد فعلا لله لكان الله فاعلا للظلم والكفر والواقع من العباد ولا وجب وصفه والكفر الواقع من العباد ولا وجب وصفه بذلك وذمه على ذلك وهذا كفر من قائله. فالنتيجة أن أفعال العباد ليس خلقا لله. The first intellectual mistake they made was they said, if the actions of the servants are actually the action of Allah, that Allah creates them, then that would mean the wrong things that we are doing, the oppression, the kufr, all of those things, we are then attributing them to Allah. And they said, you can't do that. They said, you cannot do that. You cannot attribute your actions to Allah, that Allah creates your actions of kufr and your actions of dhulm and your actions of evil, saying Allah creates them, attributing them to Allah. No, you cannot do that, they said. That was their first issue. That was their first doubt, which led them to say, therefore, these actions are not being created by Allah. They are just being created by us, to free Allah from that. This was their doubt. Secondly, لو كانت أفعال العباد خلقا لله لبطل التكليف والأمر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر بل ولا سقطت بعثة الرسل. They said, if Allah is the one who creates our actions, then the burden of responsibility is gone. Meaning all the good deeds you do, then you're not the one really doing them. And all the evil deeds you do, you're not the one really doing them. So then what's the point of even sending the messengers and the revelation and all this religion? What's the point? If Allah is the one creating all your actions, then you're not even accountable for what you do. If you do good deeds, that's not you. Allah is doing those actions and creating those actions. You have no reason to be rewarded. And if you do evil actions, Allah is the one creating them, then you have no reason to be punished. And so they said, what would be the point of any of this then? What would be the point of the messengers that were sent? If none of our actions are us, it's just Allah creating all those actions, good and bad, then why are we held accountable for anything? This was their second doubt. This was their second problem they had. The answer to both of those, jawab mujmal wa jawab mufassal. You can give a general answer and a detailed answer. أما المجمل أن يقال قد تبين لنا سابقا أن أدلة الكتاب والسنة والإجماع متضافرة على إثبات خلق أفعال العباد وهذا هو الحق وماذا بعد الحق إلا الضلال. The first is, we're not going to mention them all now, but multiple ayat and ahadith in the Quran. There are many evidences in the Quran, in the Sunnah, in the consensus that Allah is the one that creates the actions of the servants. Allah is the one that creates everything in the decree, including our actions that we do. Many evidences, we've seen some of them already in the previous lessons. Secondly, يقال أيضا إن سبب انحراف المعتزلة هو عدم تفريقهم بين الفعل والمفعول. And we spoke about that before as well. وبين الخلق والمخلوق وبالتفريق السابق تزول شبههم والمقصود أن فعل العباد مفعول لله وهو فعل للعبد وليس فعلا لله كما مر سابقا. Secondly, generally speaking, you can say that there is a difference between the one who does the action or creates the action and between where that action applies. Between the one who creates the action and where that action is applicable, how it is manifested. We'll come to the examples in a minute, you'll see what we mean. الرد على الشبهة الأولى أن الظلم والفسق والقبائح إنما يتصف بها من كانت قائمة به ولا يتصف بها من كانت مخلوقة له إذا جعلها صفة في غيره. نعم. كما أنه لا يتصف سبحانه بما خلقه في غيره من طعم أو رائحة أو شكل قبيح، فكذلك الأفعال القبيحة إنما يتصف بها من قامت به ولا في خالقها. The first detailed refutation here, that oppression and disobedience and the evils, they are all attributed to the one who does them. They are attributed to the one who does them. ولا يتصف بها من كانت مخلوقة له إذ جعلها صفة في غيره. Those evil actions or those disobedience and sin and things, they are the characteristic of the one who does the actions. They are not the characteristic of the one who created them. Allah created those affairs, decreed those affairs. But Allah is not described and attributed with those affairs. Who is the one actually doing them thereafter? The creation. They are the ones doing those things. Allah is the one who created them, but Allah is not attributed with those things. Allah created those things and they are the ones who then are attributed with those things. So there's a difference between the one who created them and the one who actually takes them on as a description, as an attribute. There's a difference between the two. فلا يتصف سبحانه بما خلقه من غير في غيره من طعم أو رائحة أو شكل قبيح. So now Allah creates the people and creation in different ways. Their characteristics, the characteristics of creation. Like Allah created us all now. Allah created us all now. There could be a person, as it mentions here, رائحة, a person who has bad body odor. A person has bad body odor, smells bad, doesn't take a shower only once a month. So now this type of person has this bad characteristic. Who created that person? Allah. But that bad characteristic, are you going to describe that to? Of course not. That bad smell from that person is him. It's going to be attributed to him. Yes, Allah created that person and created everything. But that characteristic in that person is now attributed to him. You're not going to say, well, Allah created this person, therefore all of these evil characteristics in him. I'm not pointing at you. I was going to, in case anybody thinks it's you. Everybody. So whoever that bad characteristic is in, you're not going to say, well, Allah created the person, therefore the bad characteristic is an attribute or a description of Allah. It is not. You see that clear difference? Allah created all of us humans, but if you have a bad characteristic now, bad smell, whatever, that is you. You're the one being attributed with that characteristic, not Allah who created you and created the affairs. Secondly, الرد على الشبهة الثانية وهي مردودة بما اتضح من الفرق أو من الفرق بين الفعل والمفعول. The second thing is about the difference between the one who creates the affair and a bit like what we just mentioned, and the one where the affair is implemented and applied. Allah creates, but then that creation, that affair is implemented and applied elsewhere. And that is a bit like what we said before. Allah wills everything, but Allah has also given us a will. But our will follows on from the will of Allah. So we will to do good or bad. But the choice that you make, and when you make that will, it's already willed by Allah. Allah already knows what will you're going to make, whether good or bad. But at the moment of making it, you are making it. وَقَدْ اسْتَدَلَّ هَؤُلَاءِ الْقَوْمِ, and this group of people, they use the evidence على ما يقولونه من خلق العباد لأفعالهم. They used an evidence to say that we create our own actions. Allah does not create them, separate from the decree of Allah. They said جَزَاءً بِمَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. The ayah in the Quran says a reward or a recompense for what they used to do. جزاء بما كانوا يعملون, for what they used to do. And another ayah, ما لكم كيف تحكمون, what is wrong with you? How do you make these judgments? So it appears these actions are being attributed by Allah to the creation. They are recompensed for what they used to do. And how are you judging? They say these ayahs are highlighting that we are the ones who do these actions ourselves. We are the ones who create them. وهذا قول باطل وإنما يصح إلزامهم لنا لو كنا نقول إن أفعال العباد فعلا لله. This would only be applicable if we were saying that our actions are attributes of Allah. They are attributed back to Allah. But like we said, that's not how it is. Allah created us all, but if we have a bad characteristic, bad smell, you're not going to say that is now to be attributed back to Allah. Allah created us all, but we are the ones upon the characteristics. Those characteristics and those affairs, all of them created by Allah. But the description of them is to us, not the one who created them. They don't understand that. They say, no, if Allah created it, then that's His description. And so these bad affairs have to be attributed to Him. No, they do not. Difference between the one who created and the one who was created and has these descriptions upon him. So that is the first group. The second group we'll briefly look at as well, it's only short. The second side is the Jabriyyah. These are the opposite. The Qadariyah are basically deviated in the side of saying that actions and things happen outside of the decree of Allah, outside of the will of Allah. Whereas the Jabriyyah, they go to the extreme in affirming the will of Allah. الجبرية عرف الجبر في باب القدر بأنه نفي الفعل حقيقة عن العبد وإضافته إلى الرب. They say the opposite. We do nothing ourselves. Everything is back to Allah. Whereas the Qadariyah were saying we do our own actions, we create our own actions outside of the decree. Jabriyyah, we do nothing. Everything, all our actions, it is back to Allah doing that all. We do nothing ourselves. And that is of course wrong as well. As we said, Allah wills and then gave us a will. But they again misunderstood this. الجبرية فرقة منحرفة وأشهر من يمثلهم الجهمية. So the Jabriyyah are an overall term, and the biggest group of them are the Jahmiyyah. The Jahmiyyah are upon this belief of the Jabriyyah. وقد تجد في بعض كلام السلف إطلاق القدرية على الجبرية وذلك لأنه خاضوا بالقدر الباطل. Sometimes in some of the speech of the Salaf you might find that they call the Jabriyyah the Jabriyyah as Qadariyah. And that is just as a general term, all of the groups of deviation who deviated in the topic of the Qadr. والأشاعرة داخلون في مذهب الجبرية. The Asha'ira come under this Jabriyyah methodology as well. But they are a bit more, they are less in depth as the Jahmiyyah. The Jahmiyyah went extreme in this. The Asha'ira not as much. ولماذا كان الأشاعرة جبرية في القدر? And why are the Asha'ira like that? لأنهم يقولون بالكسب وقد وقع اضطراب كبير بين الأشاعرة أنفسهم في تعريف الكسب حتى وصل الأمر إلى أن يقول سبكي الأشعري إن هناك اضطرابا في تعريفه. They have this issue of al-kasb, meaning what you earn, what you gain. قالوا العبد له كسب ومعناه أن عنده قدرة غير مؤثرة في الفعل. They said a person has a will, has an ability, but that ability has no impact. You have an ability that is really no ability. That you can't actually do anything with your ability. وضربوا لذلك مثالا, and they gave an example. They said لو أن رجلا حمل صخرة فجاء رجل آخر فصاعده في حملها فقالوا إن حمل الشخص الثاني لصخرة ليس له أثر لأن الأول قادر على حملها باستقلال. قالوا وكذا العبد فإن له قدرة ولكنها ليست مؤثرة في الفعل. They said, imagine a person is carrying a rock and he's carrying it by himself. Carrying it by himself. Somebody else sees him and just comes and puts his hand on the rock as well to help him. But the first man was capable of carrying it himself. He was carrying it. So the second person coming and putting his hand there isn't actually really making any difference. The first person can carry all of it himself. He's carrying it himself. The second person putting his hand on there doesn't make a difference. They say that's how it is. Allah is the one who does everything. You've got an ability. Your ability though has no impact in reality. Just like the second man had the ability to help and he came and put his hands there. But it was really of no impact because the first man had the ability to carry it himself anyway. They say Allah is the one with the complete ability, and you with your ability, you're like the second man who puts his hand on the rock. You're not really doing anything. With your ability, you're not really doing anything, and there is no real effect of it. وإذا كانت القدرة لا أثر لها في الفعل كان وجودها كعدمها. And so if your ability has no real impact, then it's as good as saying you don't have any ability. It's as good as saying you don't have any ability and you don't have any will. And that's what it is with them. They basically used to say that we are like feathers in the wind. Wherever the wind blows, the feather goes. They said we are like that. Whatever the decree is, we just go. We have no ability, no will of ourselves. والانحرافات عند الجبرية الانحراف الأول سوى الجبرية بين المحبة والإرادة. Again, these ones, they made a balance, made equal between what Allah loves and what Allah wills. So everything Allah wills, then Allah loves it, they said. ثم قالوا بنفي تعليل أفعال الله بمعنى أنه ليس في أفعال الله إلا مشيئة محضة. فبذلك جوزوا عليه سبحانه كل ممكن حتى ولو كان تعذيب أنبيائه وأوليائه بل وتنعيم ألد أعدائه. They began going extreme on the other side and they said there is no reasoning behind the actions of Allah. It is purely just by the will of Allah. So they said upon that maybe Allah might even will to punish His prophets and messengers. Of course Allah will not will to punish His prophets and messengers, but they said Allah will do that, or that Allah can do that, or that Allah can bless His enemies. Meaning that they said Allah does everything purely by will and there is no reasoning behind that. And of course that is completely false. Completely false. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does everything upon wisdom. أدى انحرافهم السابق إلى انحراف آخر وهو نفي حسن الأشياء وقبحها. This goes into detail about how they then were unable to recognize the difference between the beauty of things and the evil of things, saying they are all the same. But the main point here is أنهم نفوا قدرة العبد واختياره, that they rejected we have any ability, any choice. And we spoke about this before. You have a choice. When you make the choice to do something wrong or something right, at that moment of making the choice, you know you are the one making that choice. To do the right or the wrong, you're making the choice. Allah's given you that ability to make that choice. So you make the choice to do the right and to leave the haram. You make that choice. Allah gave you the ability. Did Allah know you were going to make that choice? Yes. So your will is there. But before your will, already there was Allah's will. But at the moment of making your choice, you are making it. If you choose to do haram, you're the one choosing at that moment to do the haram and doing it. And that's why some of the scholars, they said about the Jabriyah and the likes of these individuals who use examples of sins, and they say that it's not our fault. If we end up committing a sin, that was nothing to do with us, it was the decree. Some of the scholars, they said, well, if that's the case, imagine you go home one day and your house has been robbed. What are you going to do? You're going to run around, you're going to call the police, you're going to check your cameras, you're going to do everything. You're not going to say, well, that's just the decree, forget it, relax, sit down, nothing you can do. Anybody do that? Of course you do not. You take the means and you strive and you check and call the police and do all these things. So the scholars, they said, this thing that you're trying to tell us, it's nothing to do with us and we have no ability, and even if sins occur, that's not our fault. All of that is again from the misguidance of the Jabriyah now on this side, who claim that we have no free will and choice in what we do. But if that was the case, then why would people be deserving of paradise in the afterlife? If you have no choice in what you do, then you're only doing your good deeds because of the decree. And so then why are you deserving to be blessed on the Day of Judgment? And if you do evil, then why are you deserving to be punished if you're only doing that because you're being forced by the decree to do that? Of course that's wrong. You have been given a choice to do the halal or the haram, and Allah knows what choices you're going to make, and upon the choices you make, then that is what you will be held accountable upon on the Day of Judgment. That brings us to the end of the section regarding the decree. Those maybe 5 lessons or 6 lessons that we did there. That is the end of the section on the decree. Then from next week we'll go back